In the shadows of history's clean pages, there are stains that no archive dares acknowledge. Beneath the noise of parades and victory speeches lie rooms sealed in concrete, names erased in ink, and machinery that should never have been built. What we've found is not a forgotten chapter, it's a locked vault, and every key we turn risks opening something that was buried for a reason. At 3:42 hours on April 14, 1945, the forward elements of the Soviet Third Shock Army breached the outskirts of Oranienburg, cutting off the northern rail link into Berlin. The Wehrmacht retreat had already turned chaotic, but for one specific convoy, 6 covered trucks under Luftwaffe security, the route south was kept clear by a combination of last-minute diversions and desperate rearguard actions. Its cargo, later identified only as Projekt Morgenlicht, never reached its intended destination. The convoy was intercepted not by regular Red Army units, but by a detachment of Soviet Special Forces, the 2nd Spetsnaz Brigade, operating under orders from the GRU, Moscow's military intelligence. Their commander, Captain Sergei Kovalyev, later filed a terse after-action report indicating hostile resistance from enemy security detail, estimated at company strength, equipped with MP-40 submachine guns, MG-42 support weapons, and anti-tank Panzerfausts. The firefight took place on a snow-covered pass outside Bad Aussee in the Austrian Alps, lasting approximately 47 minutes before the Luftwaffe Guard was annihilated. When the Soviets breached the first truck, they found not weaponry in the conventional sense, but steel crates with reinforced welds, each bearing a stenciled Reichsadler insignia and the phrase "Nur für Reichsführungssake." The crates had no visible hinges or locks, only a single recessed aperture matching an unknown key design. Inside the second truck were portable generator units, diesel-driven, shielded with thick lead plating, and large cylindrical housings bolted to the floor, their interiors lined with coils of copper wire. Captain Kovalyev's report notes the immediate transfer of the entire convoy to a secondary staging area, where 2 GRU operatives, identified only as Major V. Krulov and Lieutenant Colonel D. Uden, took command. The remainder of the 2nd Spetsnaz Brigade was ordered to withdraw, leaving their finds behind. None of those soldiers were redeployed in subsequent operations. Within months, their service records were sealed, and several personnel were officially listed as killed in non-combat accidents. Surviving relatives received minimal compensation, and in at least 2 cases, military death certificates bore incorrect dates and locations. The crates, according to a 1968 declassified memorandum from the Soviet State Committee for Defense Technology, were flown to a facility in the Ural Mountains, designated only as Sector B-9. The memorandum, recovered from the archives of the Ministry of Media Machine Building, states that the items were non-ballistic in nature, but possessed potential for non-chemical propulsion systems beyond present capability. No further technical description appears in any surviving document. In 1979, a retired Soviet engineer named Pavel Ignatovich claimed during a recorded interview with a Western journalist that he had once seen a Morgenlicht crate inside a hangar at the Chelyabinsk 70 complex. He described the crate as emitting a faint mechanical hum even when disconnected from power sources, and recalled that its interior, when briefly opened under supervision, contained a lattice of unknown alloy that did not register on standard conductivity meters. Ignatovich died 2 weeks later in what authorities called a vehicular collision on a rural road outside Sverdlovsk. By the early 1990s, after the Soviet collapse, fragments of the Morgenlicht file surfaced in Moscow flea markets, often in the form of partially burned carbon copies of requisition forms and coded radio transcripts. One undated page, marked with the GRU seal, carries only a single handwritten annotation in the margin: "Do not retrieve until Directive Sigma Black is lifted." Sigma Black remains undefined in any released intelligence glossary. A 2004 investigative effort by a consortium of European journalists traced possible origins of the project to a small research institute in Breslau, which had been conducting advanced work in high-voltage electrical discharge and magneto-hydrodynamic flow systems for the Luftwaffe's Experimental Weapons Division. Archival invoices reveal repeated deliveries of exotic metals from facilities in Norway and Czechoslovakia during 1944, coinciding with other high-priority Reich research programs. The Breslau archives also contain a series of coded telegrams sent to an address in Berchtesgaden between January and March 1945. The messages reference final phase assembly, and transfer under Alpine protection, suggesting that the project was being moved to secure mountain storage as the front closed in. That relocation path precisely matches the route taken by the Bad Aussee convoy intercepted by Kovalyev's men. Eyewitness accounts from Austrian villagers describe hearing prolonged engine noise and sporadic small arms fire in the early morning hours on the day of the ambush. One shepherd later testified, in a 1952 Austrian police inquiry, that he saw Soviet soldiers loading large metal coffins onto heavy trucks, accompanied by men in unfamiliar dark uniforms without rank insignia. The shepherd's statement was struck from the official record. The investigator's own son later claimed his father had been warned by Soviet occupation authorities not to discuss the event. By the late 2010s, interest in Project Morgenlicht resurfaced among private military historians when a batch of declassified satellite photographs from the 1960s revealed unusual construction activity at a remote Ural site consistent with underground vaults. The vault dimensions, based on shadow analysis, matched the known sizes of the crates described in Kovalyev's 1945 report. The site remains active today, guarded by the Russian Ministry of Defense, with all aerial approaches restricted. What remains undisputed is that the crates never reached their intended Nazi recipients in the Alps. Whether Projekt Morgenlicht was a technological prototype, an unfinished weapons platform, or something else entirely has never been determined. No surviving Allied or Soviet scientist has admitted to working on the program, and all physical evidence is sealed beyond public access. The last known public reference to the operation appears in a handwritten journal kept by an anonymous archivist at the Soviet Ministry of State Security. In an entry dated June 5, 1953, the archivist notes, B9 assets stored per Sigma Black Directive. Status: dormant. Function: incomprehensible. Personnel mortality: unacceptable. No further testing authorized until change in political climate. The archivist's identity was never established, and the journal page ends abruptly with the same phrase that would appear decades later in Western intelligence briefings on the matter. Asterisk subject classified indefinitely. Retrieval not advised. Asterisk. On October 19, 1962, a rainstorm swept across the limestone hills outside Trieste, Italy. A team of CIA field agents, working without Italian police knowledge, broke the lock on an abandoned farmhouse that had been under watch since the previous spring. The structure had been shuttered since 1947, its roof partially collapsed, the surrounding fields overgrown. Inside, concealed in a false wall behind the kitchen hearth, they found 2 weathered leather satchels containing over 100 pages of brittle, water-stained documents. The find was codenamed the Obelisk files. These documents, mostly typewritten in English but with sections in German and Czech, outlined an Allied counterintelligence operation never acknowledged in any public records, Operation Harrow. Initiated in March 1946 under joint OSS-SOE authority, Harrow's mission was to track down Dr. Ernst Keller, an SS chemical engineer believed to have developed an aerosolized neurotoxin that could kill in minutes without leaving conventional autopsy evidence. Keller had served in the Reich's Chemical Defense and Protection Section, ostensibly researching anti-contamination gear. In reality, the Obelisk toxin was intended for use against civilian populations. The earliest file in the satchels was a February 1945 Abwehr intercept log referencing Phase II of Obelisk trials, conducted near Brno, Czechoslovakia. Post-war Czech police records from that month list an unexplained incident in which 37 factory workers died on site, with no cause of death recorded. The deaths were officially blamed on a ventilation malfunction, but autopsy photographs, later obtained by Harrow operatives, show no signs of asphyxiation or trauma. Keller's post-war movements were pieced together from a mixture of interrogation transcripts, hotel registries, and intercepted letters. A debriefing of captured SS adjutant Karl F. Mertens in June 1946 described Keller boarding a Red Cross relief ship in Genoa under a false identity, Johann Prell, agricultural advisor. That ship docked in Buenos Aires. Days later, Argentine Port Authority logs confirm Prell disembarked, but all subsequent traces vanish. Harrow's search expanded to South America by 1947, with station chiefs in Montevideo, Asunción, and Santiago instructed to circulate Keller's photograph only to select reliable assets. The secrecy was such that not even U.S. State Department personnel were informed. Surviving operational telegrams indicate at least 4 suspected sightings of Keller between 1947 and 1951, always within 72 hours of a political assassination or unexplained mass illness. One of the most telling files in the satchels is a field report from Harrow agent R. Fallon, dated March 12, 1949, filed from a boarding house in Córdoba, Argentina. Fallon describes arriving too late to detain Keller, finding only a burned suitcase in the room. Among the charred remains was a broken glass ampoule wrapped in wax paper marked with the SS Totenkopf emblem. Laboratory analysis at Camp Dietrich reported trace neuroactive agents consistent with nerve inhibition at micromolar concentrations, a description that, in modern terms, aligns with advanced organophosphate compounds. By 1952, Harrow's operational tone shifted from capture to containment. Several documents in the cache are redacted to near illegibility, but one intact memorandum from SOE archives bluntly states, Keller must not reach Eastern Bloc custody. Clearance granted for terminal sanction if recovery is impossible. This sanction authorization bore signatures from both British and American intelligence directors, an extraordinary measure for a man whose existence was never officially acknowledged. Witness testimony in the files paints a picture of a man constantly ahead of his pursuers. A Paraguayan doctor, interviewed under the alias Patient 9, recalled treating a tall German with deep scars on his neck, who paid in gold coins and left after receiving an injection the doctor could not identify. In Montevideo, a former dockworker reported seeing Americans with radios searching warehouses 2 days after Keller allegedly passed through the port. The Trieste discovery also contains several black and white photographs clipped to incident reports. Most are blurred surveillance shots, Keller stepping into a taxi, Keller at a street cafe, Keller boarding a ferry. In each case, the next page documents the sudden deaths or disappearances of witnesses. One particularly chilling entry comes from a 1950 Buenos Aires police log. 3 officers collapsed while inspecting a confiscated trunk at a private dockside warehouse. Their cause of death was never determined. The trunk's contents, according to a surviving inventory slip, included glass vessels, tin cylinders, and military-style protective masks. Before local authorities could conduct a full investigation, a U.S. consular officer claimed the materials under diplomatic seal and removed them. By the late 1950s, Harrow activity appears to dwindle in the files, with fewer direct leads. One final intact page, marked Rome Station, Eyes Only, records a meeting between a Harrow liaison and a Vatican contact who claimed Keller had entered Holy Ground under another name, possibly within a missionary order operating in remote South America. No follow-up document exists. After their recovery in Trieste, the Obelisk files were flown to Langley and sealed in a facility known internally as the Blue Vault. The only public trace is a heavily redacted CIA declassification request from 1993, denied on the grounds of potential compromise of ongoing human sources. This is remarkable, considering the events in question were already half a century old. In 2007, a former Argentine intelligence officer told an investigative journalist that Keller had in fact died in the late 1960s in Patagonia. The body, he claimed, was retrieved by North American operatives within hours and flown out under false export documents. The officer provided no proof, and his credibility remains debated, but his story matches the abrupt cessation of all known references to Obelisk in intelligence chatter. To this day, Keller does not appear in any official Allied post-war wanted lists, and Operation Harrow itself remains unacknowledged by both U.S. and British governments. The Trieste farmhouse is now a ruin, its walls collapsing inward. Locals say that after the Americans left in 1962, the building was never used again. No one, they claim, wanted to risk inheriting whatever history lingered there. The satchels recovered from that hearth hold the only surviving paper trail of a man who eluded the Allies, possibly for decades, and of a weapon so insidious that its very name, *Obelisk*, remains one of the least understood codenames in Cold War intelligence history. The last page in the file is unsigned, but the single sentence typed there is still legible despite water damage. He will be erased from memory before he is erased from the earth. On February 17, 1946, a British Royal Engineers detachment arrived in the ruined city of Königsberg, then under Soviet military administration and renamed Kaliningrad, to conduct a joint post-war survey of telecommunications infrastructure. Officially, the operation was part of a tripartite agreement to assess German civilian utility damage. In reality, the mission's classified annex authorized the recovery of any advanced signal or encryption equipment before it could be appropriated by the Red Army. The team, led by Major William Hackett, included 6 engineers from the 4th Field Company, Royal Engineers, 2 MI6 technical officers, and a civilian linguist seconded from Bletchley Park. Their survey focused on the Königsberg Central Telegraph Exchange, a heavily bomb-damaged 5-story building near the Pregolia River. Initial inspection revealed that the upper floors had been gutted by fire during the Soviet assault, but the basement levels remained largely intact. On the 3rd day of the inspection, Sergeant Frank Llewellyn noted unusual resonance when striking a section of wall behind the main switchboard room. Further investigation revealed a concealed steel door welded shut. Soviet liaison officers objected to the British tampering with the structure, claiming it fell within their zone of authority, but Major Hackett invoked the Joint Survey Clause and ordered cutting torches to be brought in. Behind the sealed door was a stairwell leading to a narrow corridor lined with copper sheeting and grounded cabling. The air was stale and warm, suggesting some form of contained heat source. At the corridor's end lay a chamber approximately 15 meters square, its walls similarly copper-clad, and its ceiling lined with arrays of unfamiliar antenna-like rods. Against the far wall stood a bank of equipment racks, each containing active vacuum tube assemblies humming softly despite the building having been disconnected from municipal power for months. The engineers traced the power source to a diesel generator housed in an adjoining compartment, still running and fed by a partially depleted fuel tank. The generator's cooling system was supplemented by an improvised water feed from a cistern in the upper floors. More puzzling was a cluster of steel canisters, identical in size, each marked with the Reich-Sadler seal and date codes from late April 1945, stacked neatly along one wall. They were capped with fittings that suggested fluid containment but bore no standard chemical hazard markings. Major Hackett's report, marked "Secret, Eyes Only," records that the canisters were loaded onto a covered Bedford lorry and transported under armed guard to RAF Boscombe Down within 6 days. There, their trail ends abruptly. No further mention of them appears in declassified Air Ministry files, and no chemical analysis reports have ever surfaced. A surviving MI6 memorandum from March 1946, declassified by error in 1994, provides the only additional clue. It describes the chamber's copper cladding as an RF containment measure, and states that the generator powered signal emission equipment emitting a patterned electromagnetic signature inconsistent with known radio transmission protocols. The memorandum speculates that the system could have been part of a low-frequency experimental communication or control network, though no further testing results are attached. The physical chamber in Königsberg was bricked over in May 1946 by East German construction crews under Soviet direction. When a West German historian attempted to locate the site in the late 1970s, he was informed by Kaliningrad city officials that no such structure had ever existed. Satellite imagery from the period shows heavy construction activity in the area, but the precise coordinates of the chamber are lost. Former Soviet radio engineers, interviewed decades later, claimed they had heard rumors of a German control room under the old post office that could transmit through rock and seawater. One suggested it might have been intended for secure communication with submerged U-boats in the Baltic, using extremely low-frequency ELF signals. Another dismissed this, saying the Soviets who examined it spoke of strange oscillations that matched no code and no language. In 2002, a private researcher obtained a copy of Major Hackett's personal field diary from his family estate. Among the mundane notes on supply shortages and weather conditions is a single undated entry: Boscombe request urgent. London insists immediate shipment of all crates. No handling without gloves. Emission persists even after main unit disconnected. If accurate, this suggests the canisters themselves may have been active components of the system rather than ancillary storage. The notion that a passive object could emit a detectable electromagnetic pattern in 1945 strains conventional technical understanding of the period, though post-war research into novel alloys and resonance phenomena offers partial explanations. The chamber's discovery was never publicly acknowledged. When Hackett retired in 1959, he received a letter from the War Office thanking him for services rendered in the protection of post-conflict intelligence assets, without specifying which. Sergeant Llewellyn died in 1953 in what the Army recorded as a workshop explosion. 2 other engineers from the team emigrated and refused interviews. As for the Königsberg chamber itself, no physical photographs have been confirmed, though one grainy image from a 1946 Royal Engineers contact sheet shows what could be the interior wall, with copper plating and the edge of an equipment rack just visible. The negative for this frame is missing. The most recent reference to the site appears in a 1988 East German Ministry for State Security, Stasi, inventory log, which lists Sperrgebiet 17, sealed underground vault, high electromagnetic index, no civilian access. That file was among those shredded in the final months before German reunification. Today, the area where the telegraph exchange once stood is occupied by a concrete apartment block. Residents report occasional interference with radios and televisions during heavy fog, a phenomenon local electricians attribute to atmospheric effects. Yet the coordinates align almost exactly with the location recorded in Major Hackett's 1946 survey map, placing the apartment squarely above the buried copper-clad chamber, whose purpose and contents remain officially unacknowledged more than 75 years later. On March 9, 1945, the Kriegsmarine submarine U-411 was reported sunk northeast of the Azores by depth charges from HMS Bayard, a British destroyer escort. The sinking was confirmed by Admiralty intelligence summaries, and the crew was declared lost. Yet 7 months later, a joint OSS Royal Navy SIGINT intercept recorded a cryptic German naval transmission from the Greenland Sea, referencing U-411, ARC cargo transfer complete, proceeding as ordered. The transmission was dismissed in official Allied reports as an enemy deception. However, in May 1946, declassified in part decades later, a Norwegian whaling captain submitted a sworn affidavit to the Royal Norwegian Navy claiming that in June 1945 he had seen a German U-boat, bearing a hull number beginning with 411, moored in a remote fjord on Greenland's east coast. The vessel was partially camouflaged with white painted netting and supported by a smaller craft painted in civilian Norwegian trawler livery. The captain's description matched wartime intelligence on U-411's Type WWII conning tower modifications, including an enlarged Schnorchel mast and altered deck gun platform. He claimed to have watched as several long, metal containers, approximately 2 meters in length, each fitted with refrigeration coils, were offloaded from the submarine to the trawler. He also recalled armed men in mismatched naval and civilian clothing supervising the operation. OSS files show that, in August 1945, a U.S. Navy reconnaissance flight out of Reykjavik was diverted to photograph the same fjord after anomalous signals were detected in the region. The photographs have never been released, but a surviving mission log notes berthing traces consistent with U-boat docking, accompanied by refrigeration apparatus on shore. The mystery deepened in 1978 when Norwegian Navy divers, conducting a hydrographic survey of East Greenland, located a wreck identified as U-411 at a depth of 180 meters, approximately 40 nautical miles from the fjord described in the affidavit. Contrary to the wartime sinking report, the hull exhibited localized blast damage consistent with internal demolition rather than depth charge impact. The forward torpedo room had been stripped bare. The cargo compartments were empty. Declassified fragments of a 1979 Royal Navy technical assessment note that demolition charges placed internally in pressure hull appear to have been initiated deliberately, suggesting scuttling rather than combat destruction. The report speculates that the demolition may have been intended to prevent capture of equipment or cargo still aboard. Only one surviving crewman is known to have been interrogated. In 1950, during a routine identity check in Oslo, Norwegian security detained a man matching the description of Oberbootsman Carl Dieter, U-411's senior machinist. Dieter claimed he had been ordered in April 1945 to join a special supply mission under direct command of Admiral Karl Donitz. He stated that the cargo was referred to only as Die Archie, the Ark, and that it required continuous cold during transit. When pressed on the cargo's nature, Dieter refused to elaborate, saying only that it was meant for the Reich's survival after the war. He claimed the transfer in Greenland had been to a vessel not under the Kriegsmarine flag, but protected by German military personnel. His testimony ended abruptly after a recess, with the official interrogation log recording subject unresponsive, medical distress, cardiac arrest. No autopsy results are in the file. A subsequent internal OSS memorandum classified the Greenland incident as strategic unknown, recommending all associated materials be sealed until hostile power dissolution. Analysts speculated about the Ark's nature, with theories ranging from advanced weapons prototypes to biological research samples. The refrigeration requirement and the deliberate destruction of the U-411 suggested the cargo was perishable and of critical value. In the decades that followed, occasional hints emerged in unrelated archives. A 1954 U.S. Navy logistics ledger lists special cryogenic containers shipped from Argentia, Newfoundland, to a restricted depot in Maryland. No connection is stated, but the shipment's date coincides with OSS budget allocations labeled GF transfer. In 1991, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a retired KGB naval officer gave an interview in Murmansk in which he claimed that Soviet Arctic patrols had detected foreign trawler movements along Greenland's east coast in 1945, escorted by a German submarine in snow camouflage. He further claimed that Moscow's intelligence service had long suspected the cargo was transferred to South America. Today, the fjord where the alleged transfer took place remains unmarked on navigational charts, its precise location obscured by decades of incomplete records. Satellite imagery shows abandoned wooden pilings along a narrow inlet, but no modern settlement or activity. The U-411 wreck remains under Norwegian military jurisdiction, with access prohibited to civilian divers. Requests under Norway's Freedom of Information laws have returned only the statement. The vessel is considered a war grave and the associated materials are classified due to ongoing defense relevance. The combination of contradictory sinking records, post-war sightings, and a single dying testimony has kept the Greenland transfer incident alive in naval history circles. Yet without the release of the photographs, cargo manifests, or interrogation recordings, the Ark of U-411 remains one of the most elusive unanswered questions of the war's closing months, a mission erased from both Allied and Axis official histories, preserved only in the margins of forgotten files. On September 6, 1954, an RAF Canberra PR.3 reconnaissance aircraft from No. 540 Squadron, conducting an aerial survey over southern Germany, captured an unusual image during a mapping run over the Bavarian forest near the Czech border. The photograph, later marked restricted, foreign, showed a vast, precise geometric outline beneath dense tree cover. Two concentric rings intersected by radial lines, each segment perfectly proportioned. The structure's diameter, based on the survey scale, was estimated at 180 meters. The area, according to German cadastral maps from 1938 and 1949, contained nothing but undisturbed woodland. No roads, clearings, or structures were recorded. Yet the RAF analysts in West Berlin confirmed the geometry's sharp edges suggested man-made construction rather than a natural formation. The image was forwarded to the Air Ministry's Joint Intelligence Bureau, JIB, where it was logged under a code name, Site Chasm. By December 1954, a small joint British-West German team was assembled under the cover of a forestry survey. Among them were two Royal Engineers from the Geodetic Survey Squadron, a Ministry of Supply metallurgist, and three Bundesgrenzschutz officers familiar with the region's wartime history. The on-site survey began in late May 1955. After 2 days of cutting a concealed path through the forest, the team reached a raised mound of earth and foliage that appeared to conceal a concrete surface. Soil analysis confirmed the mound was artificially placed. Excavation revealed a reinforced concrete ring embedded with steel anchor points and unusual ceramic insulators spaced at regular intervals. The surface was covered in a thin layer of metallic residue, later determined to be an aluminum-magnesium alloy uncommon in pre-war German engineering. Buried cables, heavily degraded but still intact in places, led to a collapsed underground chamber whose reinforced walls suggested a wartime military installation. The metallurgist's preliminary field report, later classified, noted that the alloy fragments bore machining marks, consistent with advanced high-speed rotary tooling, exceeding known Reich manufacturing capacity in 1944-45. In addition, fragments of curved structural panels recovered from the chamber matched scaled-up versions of blueprints attributed, without confirmation, to the Luftwaffe's rumored V-7 disc program. Local residents interviewed discreetly by the Bundesgrenzschutz recalled wartime restrictions on the forest area, with SS security patrols enforcing a 10-kilometer exclusion zone. One elderly forester claimed that in the winter of 1945 he had seen a flat, round machine, partially obscured by tarpaulins, guarded by men in black uniforms who spoke in technical jargon rather than military commands. On May 29, 1955, the British-German team reported persistent low-frequency vibrations at the site, detected on both portable seismographs and improvised stethoscopic equipment pressed to the concrete. The vibrations were not accompanied by audible noise and showed no correlation with known seismic or industrial activity. These readings persisted day and night during the week-long survey. On the seventh day, the team was abruptly ordered to cease all excavation. The recall order came from the British Cabinet Office, citing unforeseen jurisdictional conflict with Allied authorities. All physical samples, photographs, and survey instruments were crated and flown directly to RAF Boscombe Down under armed guard. The concrete ring was recovered with soil and reforested by West German forestry crews within the year. In 1968, an internal West German Defense Ministry memorandum referenced site chasm indirectly when discussing non-conventional wartime engineering projects abandoned under foreign custodial oversight. The memo noted pending consultation with UK on retrieval or permanent burial, but no follow-up correspondence has been located. The only surviving visual record available to researchers is a poor-quality photostat of the original RAF reconnaissance image, leaked in 1984 to a German aviation history journal. Analysts who examined the image noted that the radial lines within the ring align with magnetic north as it would have been in 1944, implying intentional orientation. Some speculate the structure could have been a test platform for experimental propulsion systems requiring precise alignment. In 1999, a Bavarian environmental survey using ground-penetrating radar inadvertently mapped part of the buried site. The report, quickly retracted, described a circular subsurface anomaly with metallic returns at a depth of 3 meters. Researchers attempting to follow up were denied access on grounds that the forest section was a protected ecological zone. Today, the coordinates of site chasm correspond to a dense, unbroken expanse of spruce. No trace of the concrete ring is visible from the air. Locals still tell stories of nights when the forest floor trembles slightly despite calm weather, and hunters occasionally report compasses behaving erratically within the exclusion zone. The Bavarian forest anomaly remains absent from official British and German wartime records. The Cabinet Office files on the 1955 excavation are sealed under Directive 1477, originally intended for matters of extreme defense sensitivity, with a review date postponed to 2075. Until then, the true purpose of the geometric structure, and whether it ever became operational, will remain concealed beneath the trees. The paper trails end in fire, the witnesses vanish, and the landscapes are replanted as though nothing ever happened. Yet the ground remembers. Metal sleeps under soil, whispers cling to static, and somewhere in the dark, unfinished engines still wait for orders. These are not just ghosts of the war, they are the things it left behind, still breathing under the weight of silence.